Funding for Building New York is provided by First American Title Insurance Company of New York.
Welcome to Building New York. My name is Michael Stoller. Everyone knows who Larry Silverstein is. Larry Silverstein has developed over 20 million square feet of space. He presently manages and owns over 7 million square feet of space. He's one of the largest owners and developers in Lower Manhattan, Midtown Manhattan, and for the past 50 years been very active in every activity in real estate. I'm very fortunate to have Larry Silverstein, President of Silverstein Properties, as my guest today.
Thank you, Michael.
So, Larry, you grew up in Bedford-Stuyvesant.
Wonderful part of town.
And then what happened? You grew up in Bedford-Stuyvesant, and you said to me that, was it your sister or you who had a health problem, and you couldn't take the...
She had an asthma problem. She needed a better quality of air than permeated the then Bed-Stuy neighborhood.
And then you moved over to...
So I moved to the part of the city where the air was supposed to be cleaner, purer, Washington Heights. It was. And once we got to Washington Heights, then I developed asthma. She lost hers, but I developed mine.
And you went, when you were in high school, you went to the music...
Went to High School of Music and Art. My father was a in addition to being a real estate leasing broker, he was a classical pianist. He wanted to make his livelihood at the piano, but realized after a while with family that wasn't going to work. But he taught me the piano, he taught my sister the piano. The result is both of us went to the High School of Music and Art.
But your father, as you were saying to me when we met, your father was a leasing broker.
That's correct.
He had a lot of clients on Green Street and...
Broome Street, Worcester Street, Lower Broadway, Canal Street. It was the rag and woolen and remnant district of New York.
And you graduate from high school, and then you go to NYU Heights,
That's
which
correct.
now is part of the City University.
Yes, it is.
And while you were at NYU, you were working part-time with your dad.
That is correct.
In leasing of these small spaces and everything. And then you decide that you want to go to law school. Why do you want to go to law school?
Well, because in observing the transactions which my father was involved in leasing these spaces, it was the lawyers who made the decisions that affected whether or not a deal was going to get done. And so my thought was become knowledgeable with respect to issues that lawyers deal with, and as a result be a better, more proficient, more able real estate broker.
And you go to law school during the day. Mm-hmm. You go to Brooklyn?
Brooklyn. At that time we could go to law school in the morning, and by noon we were out, and then I could join my father in the afternoons and learn the business. I learned the leasing business, leasing of space in Lower Manhattan, loft space primarily.
And then you met Clara?
And then I met Clara, and that was wonderful. She was a public school teacher, city of New York. She was earning $3,200 a year, and for the first 3 years of our marriage, we literally lived on her salary.
So it wasn't Larry Silverstein, the real estate leasing broker, who was making the living. It was Clara Silverstein.
It was Clara Silverstein.
Who was supporting the family.
She was a fantastic meal ticket, and at that point in time, we had no children. But a time came when children came, and a transition was required, at least by me. And so I remember sitting with my father one day and saying, "Dad, I'm going to start it this way, and this is no way to go. We have to become owners instead of brokers."
And suddenly you find a building at 220 East 23rd Street.
That's correct.
You have no money.
Correct.
And how do you think that Larry Silverstein is going to buy this office building over there? And how much was this building?
Actually, the building was a loft building, not a new one, but an old one, on East 23rd Street. And it was the building. I remember getting the listing to sell the building, and it was a building that was selling for $600,000. And I looked at it. My father looked at it, and I said, "Dad, why don't we try to buy this one?" And we needed $15,000 for signing the contract to the building. And we did not have $15,000. Went to every bank we could find to borrow the $15,000, and no bank, since we had no collateral, there was no bank willing to lend us the money. Subsequently, we finally ended up on a place at 85 Delancey Street,
Which
the old
was
Public National Bank.
Which then became Bankers Trust.
Then became Bankers Trust. The loan officer there was, at that time, was a gentleman by the name of Philip Green. I remember telling him the story and asking him if he would lend us $15,000. So he asked us for some papers and so on. We showed him the transaction, how the whole thing would work. And he put a piece of paper on the table and said, "Sign it." And I looked at it and I started to read it. He said, "Don't read it, just sign it." I said, "But what is it?" He said, "It's a promissory note." So I remember saying, "Are you going to give us the money?" He says, "Isn't that what you want?" I was just so absolutely shocked that we finally found a banker willing to lend us the $15,000.
Yeah, but it was $600,000.
Yes, it was.
So you needed $585,000 more.
Additional. So at which point he said, "Well, how do you expect to go about this?" And I said, "Well, what we need to do is get ourselves a mortgage. And so we're paying $600,000. Hopefully we'll get a mortgage of about $450,000. And thereby only require $150,000 in cash. And to get that, we'll try to go out to 15 people with maybe $10,000 each."
But Larry, I mean, you said to me, you really, people learn and follow the leader, and you followed the leader of Larry Wien.
That's correct. That is correct.
Harry Hemsley's partner.
That is correct.
And you were going to syndicate.
That's correct.
And
they had just done this with the Empire State Building, and I said to my father, I said, "Listen, if they can do this with the Empire State Building, we should be able to do this with this building." And so what ensued, we successfully obtained a first mortgage for the property.
It wasn't there the interesting story about the banker on the other side of 23rd Street
correct.
said to you, you need an appraisal.
That is correct.
And
So we went to a gentleman by the, I said, "Who do you recommend?" He said, "Leon Spear." So Leon Spear, went to Leon Spear, showed him the information, gave me
was
information.
Leon Spear, Hemsley?
Ultimately became Helmsley Spear, right? Part of Helmsley Spear, part of Harry Helmsley's empire. And nevertheless, he gave us an appraisal for the building, and simultaneously, he asked us if we'd have an interest in selling it, selling our contract. And my father said, "Well,"
Now, how much did he offer you a profit?
he offered us a $100,000 profit.
So wait, so you got Larry Silverstein over here, who didn't have the $15,000 to buy, to even go in the contract. You have Larry Silverstein, who's going to get the mortgage, and there's Larry Silverstein, who's going to have to get these syndicators over there, and Leon Spear offers you $100,000, and you're 26, and you didn't take it?
And I must tell you, no, if it was my determination, I would have taken the money and ran. My father looked at this and he said, "Who's the man who's offering this?" And it was a name that was then well known as a real estate operator in New York. My father said, "If it's good enough for him, it's probably good enough for us to keep." He said, "Let's try to keep this property. Let's try to figure out how to acquire this." And at the end of the day, we rejected the $100,000 profit, went to the various tenants my father had leased loft space to, asked them each if they would contribute $10,000 to this investment, and we formed a group. We formed a syndicate of investors with which we took title to this building. And amazingly, we really didn't have a clue as to what to do then. But clearly the building could use some paint. It was kind of dark and dingy, and the lobby needed some lighting. The entrance was very dark and unattractive. And so we managed to make it look more attractive with paint and lighting and so forth. And next thing we knew, we were able to lease some of the vacant space in the building. And based upon that, we began to distribute to each of these investors 1% a month, 12% a year, which was a pretty good rate of return. And so they were thrilled, and they said, "Why don't you go out and buy another property?"
And the second property,
So
you
second
bought it from
property,
Harry Hemsley.
we actually ended up buying a building from Harry Helmsley, and a building on East 47th Street, and that was a larger transaction. We did it similarly, and that worked quite well. And then the second led to a third, led to a fourth.
But wasn't there a turning point? I think you said to me 105 Madison Avenue. That was a turning point for you as a unique type of thing. You took a loft building or a warehouse.
We took a loft building that was a center for the lingerie manufacturing trades. There were all manufacturers in that building, lingerie manufacturers. So there was sewing, there was cutting, there was shipping, so forth. And what we decided to do was to take one floor, fully occupied building. We decided to take one floor and vacate it and see if we couldn't lease it as improved office space. And so what we did, since the tenants at that time were paying about under $2 a square foot in rent as lingerie tenants, we went to the market to see if we can get $5 a square foot as for office space. And to do it, we put in a suspended acoustical ceiling and recessed fluorescent lighting, and we put up some partitions and made the space look better. And amazingly, we got the $5 a foot from a tenant. That tenant turned out to be the New York Telephone Company. Based upon that floor, they then leased a second, then a third, then a fourth, then a fifth, and after a while they leased half the building. And we suddenly found ourselves with an enormously successful venture, enormously successful. At which point, instead of having to go to a series of individuals, for the first time, the banks came to us and said, "What do you need? Whatever it is you need, we'll give you, we'll lend to you." And so that suddenly developed a sea change in our lives. And for the first time, we were able to go out and acquire larger properties, properties that gave us an opportunity to completely modernize them, improve them substantially.
And you did that again at 11 West 42nd Street.
Ultimately, 11 West 42nd Street became a much larger transaction where we did almost what you'd call a gut rehabilitation. The only thing worth preserving in that building was the shell and the core, the floors. But on the interior, everything needed to be redone. And we did. And we converted that building into a modern office building, if you will, and successfully leased it to large tenants, occupying floors that were almost 40,000 square feet in size. Building location was on West 42nd Street through to 43rd Street. Good location, and it became a very successful venture.
How does Larry Silverstein leave the office space and go to the west side between 11th and 12th Avenue, where nobody wanted to go, and build a residential? You get involved with a garage, right? A big parking lot.
In fact, there was the
Chinese embassy was there.
That's true. But we found that there was a square block that suddenly came on the market. 11th to 12th Avenues, 41st to 42nd Street. It was a single-story. It was zoned for single-story industrial. As a matter of fact, it was a big parking lot at the time. But all you could do with it is manufacture on that site, but single-story industrial. The seller wanted $20 million for the parcel.
And this is what, 1980?
This is 1984. And I looked at the parcel, and I thought to myself, my goodness, a square block on 42nd Street in Manhattan. Extraordinary. Literally extraordinary. True, all the way over to the west side. If you went off any further west, you'd get wet. You'd be in the Hudson River.
Great views of the river.
Great views. And very cold in the winter, very blowy. Nevertheless, I remember going to Ed Koch, who was mayor at the time, told him that what I would really like to accomplish here with this block was to get the city to rezone it for me to 10 times its present use, and to allow me to put either residential or commercial or retail or parking or any combination thereof, because of where it was located, there was nothing there at the time. And so I said, my thought was, I couldn't know what it would lend itself to. Therefore, I needed flexibility in the zoning. And I said, but I need it rezoned. And so he said, it sounds like a reasonable idea. He said, there's no commitment from me. You need to go to Herb Sturz, head of city council, tell him what I said with no commitments, but I won't oppose it. And so based upon that, I went to Herb Sturz, city planning commissioner, told him exactly what Ed Koch had said, told him what my plans were. And he said, well, sounds reasonable. Now he said, again, no commitments from me, because you have to go through the process. But it sounds like a reasonable plan. And now it's your call as to whether or not you want to take the risk. I tried to get a conditional contract conditioned on rezoning, but the seller wouldn't allow us to do that. He said, if you're going to buy it, put down the cash and that's it. And so we took what is called a gamble, a $20 million gamble. We bought the block with no zoning other than single-story industrial, for which $20 million was a hugely excessive price. But we then proceeded to file our zoning application, and it took us about to 1985 to get the property rezoned. It took us about 5 years. And at that point in time, we went from a parcel that would support 180,000. It was, let's see, the block was 80 by 200, 160,000 square feet. It was 800 feet in length and 200 feet in width. It would support 160,000 square. It was a single-story industrial, 160,000 feet. Went from 160,000 feet to 1,600,000 feet of varying uses, and which was wonderful. We then found ourselves with a lawsuit. Someone sued the city for spot zoning. I remember the mayor calling me and saying, I'm sorry, we bought the site in 84. By 89, it took us about 4 or 5 years to get the zoning. By 1989, we had it rezoned, and a lawsuit started. And I remember Ed Koch calling me, and he said, Larry, he said, this is a holdup. Don't pay this man one dime. And so I said, okay, Ed. I said, it's all well and good for you to say that. I said, but now I'm paying significant taxes on this thing, and I have a major investment in it. I said, but I'm going to take over the litigation because I can do it faster than the city could do it, and expedite this thing, which I need to do. And so I spoke to the man who started the litigation, and I asked him what he wanted. And he said I'd have to make an offer to ascertain what it was that would satisfy him. And I said, but I didn't start the lawsuit, you did. So I said, give me an offer. Tell me what you want for an offer. He said, well, you'll have to make me an offer to find out. At which point I said, okay, I'll give you $250,000, and that's it. Get lost. And he rejected it. I said, well, you reject it? I said, what is it? He said, it's not adequate. I said, what is adequate? He said, you're going to have to go higher. I said, how much higher? He said, you're going to have to find out. I said, you're asking me to bid against myself. You're not giving me any response whatsoever. I said, I don't do that. The $250,000 off the table, litigate.
And when did you start building the residential tower?
The residential tower, well, at the conclusion of that litigation, which took about 2 years, we won, clearly. But by the time we had won the litigation, we were in the early 90s. And at that point, the city was in a deep real estate recession, depression, if you will. It was very bad. You couldn't build anything. Nobody wanted anything. It took about 4 years for the market to come back. And by 1996, it became obvious to me that this could be an excellent site for a rental apartment house. And so we started our plans for a 40-story rental apartment house, an 80-20, 80% market, 20% subsidized, and got our plans and specs in order. Went for tax-exempt financing, FHA financing, and suddenly found myself faced with a problem. I got a call from the governor, and Governor Pataki at that time, and he said, Larry, we're going to want to expand the convention center, and we're going to need your parcel of land. And I said, Governor, I've owned this thing since 1984, and we've been through all kinds of problems with it. I said, but now it's time for us to build this thing. He said, but we could use the site for an expansion of the Javits Center. And so I looked at the expansionary plans for the center, which at that time were on the table. And I remember making a proposal to him, to which we would actually donate the land. He wouldn't have to give us the land. He wouldn't have to pay for it. Wouldn't have to condemn it. We'd give it to him, give it to the convention center, in exchange for which they would give us the air rights over the land, over the convention center, and allow us to build this building above. and give us some additional air rights that would make it profitable for us. And he thought it was an excellent idea. And so he said, Larry, he said, we're gonna see if we can't get this done. This is good for you and good for us. This way we don't have to pay for the land. And it made a great deal of sense. It was a win-win. Good for the state, good for the city, and good for us. As it turns out, a problem developed between the governor and Mayor Giuliani at that time, and they suddenly found themselves at odds.
But finally, the building's built.
But finally, the building got built.
Let's go downtown. It's the early '80s, and you decide that you want to build a building, and you want to deal with the Port Authority, and you decide to build 7 World.
Well, there was an opportunity in 1980 to bid for the site of what was called the Keystone site, owned by the Port Authority. They had built the Twin Towers. They were up and running, and decided in 1980 that they were not going to build yet again. They were going to leave that to the private sector. And so they put this property, the Keystone site, up for bid, and it was a sealed bid. And we decided to enter the bid, and we ended up prevailing. We ended up winning it. And so we went into negotiations with the Port Authority. Took an extended period of time, but we finally got a 99-year lease signed, and we now controlled the site. And we had the ability to build a 40-story, million-square-foot building with 25,000 square foot floors. Now, there was a Con Ed substation that the port had built into the site, and through which they put the foundations for this 40-story building that was to rise above it. But as we looked at the site and the floor plans and looked at the marketplace, we came to the realization that the best use of that land was not a 25,000 square foot footprint, but a 45,000, a 47,000, of close to 50,000, as much as we could get, because in certainly talking to prospective investment bank users downtown, they want the big floors.
So you're able to get this change with Con Ed and everything, and you embark on building a 2 million square foot building.
Correct.
And your first tenant was who? Was it going to be Solomon Brothers, or?
Well, as the building was coming up out of the ground, we were building it on spec. As the building was coming up out of the ground, we got a call from John Goodfriend over at Solomon Brothers, who said, we might be able to use 1 million feet in this building. And so we proceeded to get together with them, made presentations and so forth. They said, we think we'd like to take 1 million feet. And so we started documenting the transaction. At just about the time when the city was marketing the Coliseum site up on 59th Street, Columbus Circle. Beautiful site, beautiful opportunity. We decided to bid on it, and we found that we lost the bid to Mort Zuckerman, who developed plans for a most unusual designed building, and those plans he then brought to Solomon Brothers.
Right. And then you had the situation that Solomon left, then Drexel was going to be your tenant, and then there was the Ivan Boesky situation, and then you completed a building, and right now Solomon doesn't go over there, and subsequently a spec building, Larry Silverstein builds, and you get your tenant.
I built a 2 million square foot building on spec. First I lost Solly, then I lost Drexel for the entire building because they went under because of the Boesky and Milken scandal, and subsequently, when Solomon recognized they were never going to be able to occupy that building up at Columbus Circle, there was too much litigation connection with it. They came back to me, and we leased 1 million square feet to them at 7, and that 1 million feet.
And then how do you decide to bid to buy the Trade Center site?
Well, interestingly, I remember in 1987, as the building at 7 World Trade Center was nearing completion. I remember at the topping out ceremony, looking up at the Twin Towers, and said to myself, "My God, if they ever decide to sell those, wouldn't that be fantastic to own the Twin Towers?" And when the Port Authority decided to get out of the ownership of the Twin Towers in '99, they approached us along with many others. I think there were something like 27 qualified, maybe 34 qualified bidders. We were one of them. And by 2000, early 2000. We became one of 5 finalists, and that process moved on well into 2001.
Right. And then subsequently, because we only have a couple more minutes, you have the opportunity. You lose. You're really out of it.
We lost the site.
You bid $3.2 billion.
Correct.
It was $3.2 billion, $50 million.
$3.25 billion was bid by Vornado.
Then Vornado says to you, hey, you know how to deal with the Port Authority better than I do, and they leave. And then it's 7 weeks before the tragic events of 9/11.
That's correct.
Over there,
we closed at 7. We closed at the 26th day of July, and in September the 1st of 2001. Right. We all know what happened.
And
here we are.
Because I only have 2 minutes left, I really want to. And then you're moving your office down there.
We're moving our office. That's
right,
correct.
and your son and daughter
are their way down.
Are down, and then fortunately, or unfortunately, you have your skin. You go to the dermatologist. Clara says to you, you got to go to the dermatologist on 9/11. You say, I'm not going to the dermatologist. I always go to the Windows of the World. That was a very fortuitous situation.
Well, business meetings, and that was my first obligation, was to negotiate leases with my tenants. But that morning, fortunately, she made the dermatologist appointment for me. I couldn't go, and she saved my life.
We have 2 minutes left, but the real key is, after 7 falls down, you build once again on spec this magnificent new building, which last week was awarded an award for the greatest new building in 2005. And it's on spec. And you constantly have always done that. Tell me a little bit about the new 7.
Well, the new 7 is a little bit smaller than the old. It's taller, but the floor sizes are only 40,000 feet as opposed to 47,000. It's a much more beautiful building. This one's designed by David Childs of Skidmore. It's a glass curtain wall building. It's spectacularly, I think it's very attractive. It's a glass facade, allows the light to come into the space because it's low E glass, non-tinted, not in any way colored, and the views on 4 sides are phenomenal. The space is very efficient. It's a typical Skidmore design, and the space looks magnificent.
Larry, in your over 50 years of involvement and your marriage to your wife, you have truly been an unbelievable builder of New York, an advocate of Midtown, Uptown, Lower Manhattan, and I'm so fortunate and happy that you've been my guest today on Building New York.
Thank you very much, Michael. Appreciate it.
Funding for Building New York was provided by First American Title Insurance Company of New York.